Okay, so we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is probably the most common way that people solve quadratics, which are your x squared problems. The quadratic formula is handy in that it will always work. Okay, some of the other methods of solving need the problem to be set up in a very specific way to work out. Quadratic formula is not like that. It is something that will always work. In order to use the quadratic formula, your problem either needs to start out f of x equals some sort of quadratic, which was the ax squared plus bx plus c, or the whole thing needs to be equal to 0, are the two ways these problems set up. If you end up having x's on both sides of a problem, you need to make sure that you put everything on the left side in the correct order, where you go x squared, x, and then constant term, and then go about solving it. Okay, so what the quadratic formula is, and it's written down, but I'm going to put it here anyway, is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. It's important when you write the formula that you make sure you extend the line so that the 2a is underneath everything. Weird common mistake people make is that they only put it under this back half and not the front half. Whole thing. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to pick out what A, B, and C are, and then we'll plug them through the formula. We're doing quite a few of these because the quadratic formula can do some different things, and I just want to make sure that we cover our bases, because this is similar to factoring in that it crops up in literally every other math class you will ever take. Okay. So number 1, you've got 2x squared minus 16x plus 27. Okay, so these are all f of x equals, so you don't have to worry about moving things around and simplifying them. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick out a, b, and c and then throw it into the formula. So a is always your number in front of x squared. B is always your number in front of x. And c is always going to be your constant term. Okay, so you have x equals. So it starts with negative b. So we've got a negative 16 plus or minus square root. And here you've got b squared minus 4ac. So in parentheses, okay, you do b squared, because if you leave the parentheses out, often you get your signs wrong because it will square this and make it a negative number, which you don't want. So you've got b squared minus 4 times 2 times 27 over 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, so in terms of simplifying, first thing you want to do is you want to look for a double negative here, because the negative 16 is really just 16. Next thing you want to do is you want to figure out the number that is underneath the square root. So to do that, you want to type in this expression that's under the square root, not including the square root part. So you just want to type in negative 16 squared minus 4 times 2 times 27. Just like this, parentheses and all, not including the square root that you have, okay? So I'm going to do that real fast because I don't know what the number is off the top of my head. Okay, then you end up with 40 over 2 times 2, which is going to be 4. So the next thing you need to do is you need to break 40 down. Now to break 40 down, that's why we went through one of the reasons we went through simplifying square roots before, because you have to simplify it with the upside down division thing, where you'll take 40, it'll go in the box, and you'll break 40 down. So 2 goes into 40, you get 20, 2, you get 10, 2, you get 5, 5, you get 1. So you can pull a 2 and leave the 10. So then you're looking at 16 plus or minus 2 square root 10 over 4. So the last thing you do is you try to see if you can simplify. In order to simplify, you need a number that goes into this, this, and this. Remember the 10, because it's under a square root, will stay that forever. So 2 goes into 16, 2, and 4. So then you want to divide them all by 2. So 16 divided by 2, you're looking at 8 plus or minus 1, which you don't have to write down, square root of 10 over 2. And then that is what your final answer is going to look like. And because of the plus or minus, this is technically 2 answers, but we're going to leave it as sort of one chunk of things instead of making it 2 answers. There is a specific time when you make it 2 answers, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So we've got 7 to go. All right, number 2. So we've got 4x squared plus 3x minus 2. So same thing. These are all going to start out in the right format. You just want to identify what A, B, and C are. So A is going to be 4, B is 3, and C is -2. And now we're going to throw it through the formula. So then you've got negative B, which is 3, plus or minus square root. You've got B squared minus 4 times A, which is 4, times C, which is -2, over 2 times A, which is going to be 4. Okay, so here we don't have a double negative, so I'll just recopy that. So then same thing, I want to type this into my calculator, not using the square root button.
Hey, Mama. Hey, help me.
Sure, sweetie.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm making a video, honey. Here.
Mama.
Here. Nope. Go sit.
I was presenting your letter.
You're looking at the letters? Okay. Well, I'll get you when I'm all done, okay?
Okay.
All right. Sorry. All right, so again, typing that in. So you've got 3 squared minus 4 times 4 times -2. So when you type that all in, you end up with 41 over 8. 41 is actually a prime number, so that's all this one is going to do because you won't be able to break it down. So then that will be your answer. All right, number 3. So we've got x squared plus 6x minus 27. So you want to pick out A, B, and C. So here there's no number in front of x squared, but the x squared term is there. So it's really just 1. B is going to be 6 and C is going to be -27. So then x is going to be -b plus or minus square root. You've got b squared minus 4 times 1 times -27 over 2 times 1. So you got -6 because that won't change, plus or minus square root. You want to type in the 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times -27. Make sure this is a minus and not a negative when you're typing it in. Otherwise it won't come out right. And same thing, just put the parentheses in. Don't start making things times symbols and such. Okay. You end up with 144 over 2. Now this is a very specific case in that 144 actually does square root. The square root of 144 is 12. Same thing, if you know it's 12, great. If you didn't know it was 12, then you could put it in that upside down box and break it down and realize that it was 12 that way. So I'm just going to change it into 12. So this is a very special case, I guess, in that -6 and 12 actually will go together. You can't combine numbers and square roots, but you can combine numbers and other numbers. So since these go together, you need to actually get your 2 completely separate answers, okay? Because if you remember, I said the plus and the minus is why it's 2 different answers. So you make 2 problems out of it. You make it -6 plus 12 over 2, where you use the plus version, and you make it -6 minus 12 over 2, and you use the minus version. And then you need to simplify them both down. So doing this one, you'll do -6 plus 12, which is going to be 6. And then 6 divided by 2 is just going to be 3. So then that's this one. Here you've got -6 minus 12, which is going to be -18. -18 divided by 2 is going to be -9. And then those are your two separate answers. So I want to talk about a couple more, and then we'll be done. So we're looking at 5. Then you got 2x squared minus 12x plus 14. So same thing, we'll identify a, b, and c. So a is 2, b is negative 12, and c is 14. So then you've got a negative b plus or minus square root. You've got b squared minus 4 times a times c over 2 times a. So same thing, negative 12 is technically 12. And then you want to figure out the number underneath the square root, which you need to type in, watching the parentheses, especially here, because this is negative. It doesn't technically matter when it's not negative, but when it is negative, it goofs everything up if you leave the parentheses out. So when you type that in, you end up with 32 over 2 times 2, which is 4. So then you want to break 32. So 2, you get 16, 2, 8, 2, 4, 2, 2, 2, 1. So here you can pull 2 sets of 2, so you'll pull a 4. So then you've got 12 plus or minus 4 square root 2, because that's left over 4. Now here 4 goes into all of them, so you want to divide everything by 4. You can't leave finished problems over 1. So since 1 is technically what would be left on the bottom, you just get rid of it and pretend it's not there. Okay, so 12 divided by 4, you're looking at 3 plus or minus 1, which you don't have to write down, square root 2 over 1, which again we don't write down. The only time you want to write the 1 down is if this had been a 4, where this would be a 1. You can't just disappear the term. You would need to put the 1 in as a placeholder at that point, okay? So that's what that one looks like. All right, number 6. So same thing, we're going to identify A, B, C. So A is going to be 1. B is going to be 12 because that's your number in front of X, and C is negative 52. And then we will throw it through the formula. So you've got negative B plus or minus square root. You've got B squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 52 over 2 times 1. So then you got negative 12 plus or minus. And same thing, you want to figure out the number that is underneath the square root. So you'll do the 12 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 52, which is 352 over 2. And then we got to break 352 down. So it's an even number, which means 2 will go in. You get 176, which also divides by 2. You get 88, which divides by 2. And you get 44, which divides by 2. You get 22, divides by 2. You get 11. All right, so then you can pull 1 set of 2, 2 sets of 2. So you'll pull a 4, and you have a 22 left over. So then you're looking at 12 plus or minus 4 square root 22 over 2. And 2 goes into 12, 4, and 2. Remember, we don't care about the 22. It's going to stay 22 since it's underneath the square root. So then you want to divide those 3 parts by 2. So then you're looking at 6 plus or minus 2 square root of 22. It would be over 1, which, again, we don't write down. Okay? So, last 2. I like to do the last 2 because you are missing a term. So I want to talk about what it means when you're missing a term so that you don't mess those up. So here we've got 3x squared minus 5x. Notice we're missing the constant. That means that you're missing your C value, because C always goes with the constant, B always goes with the X, and A is always going to go with your X squared term. So A is 3, and B is -5, and C is 0. You can't just not write down C in the formula. You have to make sure you put in 0 all the places that C would show up. So here you've got a negative B plus or minus square root. You've got B squared minus 4 times 3 times 0 over 2 times 3. So here you have that double negative, which just makes it 5. Here, -5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 0, which you would put into your calculator. Remember, all at once, not including the square root, ends up being 25 over 6. Square root of 25 is just 5 without the square root anymore. And then this is one where all of the square roots disappear. And because all of the square roots disappear, you need to make 2 problems out of it. So you do 5 and use the plus version, simplify that, and then you do 5 and use the minus version and simplify that. So 5 plus 5 is going to be 10. 10 over 6 is going to reduce to be, if you divide them both by 2, 5 over 3. 5 minus 5 is going to be 0. 0 divided by 6 is going to be 0. And then those will be your 2 answers. Last one. So we've got f of x is going to be -2x squared plus 7. So here we're missing the x term, which means that your a value is -2. Your b value, because you have no x term, is what is 0. And then c is going to be 7. Okay? So then you've got x equals, 0 is not positive, nor is it negative. So to write -0 would be weird. Just write 0, okay? Plus or minus square root. You've got 0 squared minus 4 times -2 times 7 over 2 times -2. So this 0 really can just disappear. Because to write it there wouldn't make sense. So really then you've got plus or minus square root. You put this into your calculator and you end up with 56 over -4. So now we're going to break 56. So you can put in 2. You get 28. Put in 2. Get 14, put in 2, you get 7, 7, 1. So you'll pull a 2. So then you're looking at plus or minus 2 square root 14 over -4. When you have a negative down here, I don't like to leave a negative on the bottom. I think it's sloppy. The plus or minus technically will absorb the negative, because if you divided the whole thing by -1, it wouldn't change. So I would just get rid of the negative. I'll talk in a minute about what happens when you have a number here and you're trying to get rid of this negative. And then you just want to reduce 2 over 4. So 2 over 4 is going to reduce to 1 over 2. So then you've got plus or minus 1, which you wouldn't write down, square root of 14 over 2. And that would be your answer. You technically can write the 0 in front there, but it's kind of pointless. Okay, so one thing I want to mention real fast, in case it pops up. Okay, so let's say you have a problem like this, where you have a negative on the bottom. It's awkward. When I have a negative on the bottom like this, the only thing that I do is I take it and I'll put it in front of this and just change the sign. It looks cleaner. Is it wrong if you leave it down here? No, technically not, but it's just awkward. So when it's negative, same thing, I just pop it up. If both of these had been negative, then same thing, when I pulled it up, that would turn this into a positive number, and I would just leave it like that. It just makes the answer look a little bit cleaner. And that would be it.